high in the Pyrenees, where the mountain wall runs for nearly 500 kilometers, around 300 miles, and the highest peaks climb past 3,400 meters, more than 11,000 feet. There lives a people who were supposed to be a miracle. The last survivors of old Europe, a Stone Age population that stood perfectly still while the rest of the continent was swept away and replaced. They speak a language related to nothing else on Earth. Their blood, we were told, was the purest in Europe, unchanged since the Ice Age. It is one of the most beautiful stories in all of prehistory, and almost every part of it is wrong. The truth about the Basques is stranger and far more interesting than the legend, because they did not escape history. History caught them and rewrote their blood, exactly as it rewrote everyone else's. And yet something did survive that should not have. Not their genes, their words. This is the real story of Europe's oldest riddle. Along the western spine of the Pyrenees, where Spain meets France on the shoulder of the Bay of Biscay, lies a homeland its people call Euskal area. Around 3 million people live here, and roughly 1 in 3 of them speaks Euskara, the Basque tongue. And for more than a century, they have been Europe's favorite mystery, because they carry not one riddle, but 2, braided together. The first is written in their language, the second is written in their blood. For generations, we thought the 2 had a single answer, that these were the last of the living fossils, an Ice Age people who never changed. To see why that answer collapsed, we have to pull the 2 riddles apart and solve them one at a time. We begin with the language. Every living language in Europe belongs to a family. English and Spanish, Russian and Greek, Persian and Hindi, all of them are distant cousins, branches of a single ancient tree we call Indo-European. Trace them back far enough and they meet, except for one. Euskara has no branch on that tree. It has no branch on any tree. Linguists call it a language isolate, and the Basque case is the most extreme in Europe. It is not merely unusual, it has no proven relative anywhere in the world. People have searched for 200 years. They tried to tie it to Iberian, the lost language written across ancient Spain before Rome. Basque even helps us sound out those old inscriptions, and yet the 2 languages refuse to connect. They tried to link it to the tongues of the distant Caucasus and to older families still. Every attempt has failed. The only ancestor we can actually find for Basque is an older form of itself. In the Roman period, across what is now southwestern France, Latin scribes recorded the names of local people and local gods. We call that language Aquitanian, and in it we can already hear Basque. A word for a young woman that echoes the Basque-nesca, names built from Andere, meaning lady, from Gizon, meaning man. Even a single carved name, Umesahar, breaks cleanly into 2 words a Basque speaker still knows today: Ume, a child, and Zahar, old. 2,000 years ago, someone was already speaking the grandmother of modern Euskara. And the language does not only survive in stone, it survives in the oldest stories the Basques tell. Long before Christianity ever reached these valleys, the Basques honored a pantheon whose names are pure Euskara, still readable today. Mari, the great goddess of the mountains and the storms, who dwells in the high caves and clefts of the peaks. Basajaun, the Lord of the Woods, a towering wild guardian of the forest, whose very name is a Basque compound, Baso, meaning the wild woodland, and Jaun, meaning Lord. In the old tales, it was Basajaun who first held the secrets of wheat and of iron, until a clever farmer stole them for humankind. These are not merely legends, they are the language breathing in its most ancient form, a mythology that answers to no Roman god and to no Indo-European sky father. And here we reach the honest edge of what we know. Writing lets us follow Basque back about 2,000 years, and no further. Beyond that, we are reading shadows, but this much is certain. Euskara is older in Western Europe than the entire Indo-European family that surrounds it. It is a survivor from before the great language that conquered the continent. The question is how it survived, and to answer that, we have to turn to the blood. Around 5,000 years ago, the map of European ancestry was torn up and redrawn. Out of the vast grasslands north of the Black and Caspian Seas came a people we associate with the Yamnaya culture. Herders of the Pontic Caspian steppe. They had wheels, they had horses, and they moved west in numbers that changed the genetic face of the continent forever. This is the migration that carried steppe ancestry, and with it, a single dominant male lineage, the Y chromosome haplogroup R1b, deep into Western Europe. Nowhere shows the shock more clearly than Iberia. In 2019, a landmark study led by the geneticist Inigo Olalde read the genomes of hundreds of ancient Iberians, and the numbers were staggering. By around 2,000 years before Christ, roughly 40% of the ancestry of the entire peninsula had been replaced by incoming steppe-related people. And on the male line, the replacement was almost total. Nearly 100% of Iberian Y chromosomes were swept away and replaced by R1b. Read that again. Not 40% of the men, nearly all of them. Within a few centuries, the fathers of Iberia had been almost entirely displaced. The newcomers who arrived were overwhelmingly men. They did not wipe the local population away. They joined it, fathering the generations that followed with the women who were already here. The incoming fathers and the local mothers. Hold on to that image, because it will matter enormously when we return to the language. This is the wave that broke over Europe, and the Basque homeland sat directly in its path. So here is the question that shatters the legend. When that wave hit, did the Basques stand still? They did not. The Basques carry steppe ancestry too. They were part of the turnover, not exempt from it, and the proof is the very thing that was once used to argue for their impossible antiquity. For decades, people pointed to one striking fact. The Basques have some of the highest frequencies of Y chromosome R1b anywhere on Earth. That was taken as evidence of an ancient, isolated Stone Age male line. But ancient DNA turned that argument completely on its head. R1b is not the mark of the old world. It is the fingerprint of the new one. It is the lineage the steppe herders carried when they replaced Iberia's men around 4,000 years ago. And the way it arrived is the strangest part. The famous bell-shaped pots that swept across Bronze Age Europe, the beaker culture, were not an Eastern invention. They began here, in Iberia, and spread outward across the continent. But somewhere in the heart of Europe, that Western fashion met the Eastern herders and merged with them. And when the beaker world flowed back west into Iberia, it carried something new in its veins: steppe ancestry and the R1B line. The pottery was homegrown, the fathers were not. So the Basques do not have high R1B because they are impossibly old. They have high R1B because they were conquered at the level of the bloodline by the same Bronze Age migration as everyone else. Their Iron Age ancestors were, in genetic terms, a fairly ordinary Iberian population, roughly 60% of the older farmer and hunter-gatherer substrate, and roughly 40% steppe. There is a subtlety worth keeping. That same very high R1B does not make the Basques as heavily shifted towards steppe ancestry across the rest of their genome as, say, Northern Europeans, who carry it at similar rates. A single male lineage can track a real invasion without measuring the whole story of a people. The men arrived, the genome absorbed them and moved on. So the myth is broken. The Basques were not bypassed, which leaves us with a deeper and far better mystery. If they were reshaped like everyone else, then why today do they look so unmistakably their own? The answer is not that the Basque clock never started. It is that, at a certain point, the Basque clock stopped. The same 2019 study delivered the real solution, and it is elegant. Present-day Basques, it found, are best described as a typical Iberian Iron Age population, but without the admixture events that later transformed the rest of the peninsula. Because after the Iron Age, Iberia kept changing. Beginning in the Roman period and continuing for centuries, new gene flow poured in from the Eastern Mediterranean, and above all, from North Africa. Roman networks, and later almost 800 years of Al-Andalus, layered new ancestry across Spain and Portugal, again and again. Almost everywhere, but not in the Basque valleys. To understand why, you have to understand the ground itself. The Pyrenees are not a single ridge, but a dense, folded maze of steep valleys and blind gorges, poor in exactly the flat, fertile land that empires are built to harvest. When Rome came, it did come. It planted a town on the edge of Basque country and named it for the general Pompey, the place we now call Pamplona. But Rome spent its strength on the rich lowlands, and its language and its settlers only trickled thinly into the high valleys. The mountains were taxed lightly, Romanized lightly, and largely left to themselves. Centuries later, when the armies of Al-Andalus swept across Iberia, they weighed the same ground and reached the same verdict in reverse. Their power grew from the warm, fertile plains of the south. The cold, broken mountains of the north offered little reward and endless difficulty, and they were never durably held. They were raided, not settled. In the year 778, in a high pass in these very mountains, Basque fighters ambushed and annihilated the rearguard of Charlemagne's army at Roncesvalles, a defeat so complete it hardened into legend. This was simply not land that outside powers could absorb. Behind their mountains, the Basques largely sat those chapters out, and so they became something extraordinary, a time capsule. When you look at a modern Basque genome, you are looking, in effect, at what the people of Iberia used to be, before Rome, before Al-Andalus, before 1,000 years of Mediterranean and African gene flow reshaped the peninsula around them. The Basques are not a fossil of the Ice Age. They are a snapshot of the Iron Age. They are the Spain and the France that once was, preserved almost by accident, while the countries around them moved on. The Pyrenees did not keep the world out. They simply slowed it down just enough. Which brings us back to where we started, to the language, and to the single most important idea in this entire story. Genes and words do not travel together. Think about what that Bronze Age migration did. It replaced nearly every Y chromosome in Iberia, and across almost all of Europe, it did something else as well. It replaced the languages. The steppe migrations are the reason Indo-European is spoken from Ireland to India today. Where the genes went, in most places, the words followed. But not here. We now know that steppe ancestry spread even into regions that never became Indo-European speaking. The Basque country is the greatest example on Earth. The genes turned over, the R1b lineages arrived, and yet the language held. Euskara did not fall. How? We cannot say for certain, but the most compelling idea takes us straight back to that lopsided encounter. If the incomers were mostly men and the mothers were local, then it may have been the mothers who set the language of the home. Generation after generation, children learned to speak at their mother's side, and their mother spoke Euskara. The father's blood won, the mother's tongue won. It is a beautiful theory. And there is a catch that keeps honest historians awake. The very same pattern, incoming men and local women, played out across almost the whole of Europe, and nearly everywhere else. It was the newcomer's language that triumphed, not the mother's. So the Basque country is not simply an exception. It is an exception to the exception. And here is the strange, humbling truth at the heart of this story. We can read their genomes. We can date the migrations. We can measure, almost to the percentage, how much of their blood came from where and when. The riddle written in their blood, we have solved. And we still cannot tell you why the words survived. Something in these valleys, some density of people, some shelter of the mountains, some accident we have no name for, let the old tongue live where it died in every other corner of Europe. That answer is not in the genomes. It may not be anywhere at all. It is the one piece of the puzzle still missing, and it is the piece that matters most. And maybe that is fitting. The real wonder of the Basques was never going to be something we could fully explain. Not untouched purity, which never existed. Something rarer and more human. A language that outlived the very people who, everywhere else, erased its rivals. Euskara is the last living voice of a Europe that spoke before Indo-European. For almost 4,000 years, the greatest threat to Euskara was the slow pressure of history. And then, within living memory, it nearly ended in a single generation. Under the dictatorship of Franco, the Basque language was driven out of the schools, out of the offices, out of the public square. To speak it in the wrong place was to invite punishment. A tongue that had outlived the Bronze Age was, in the 20th century, pushed to the very edge of silence. What saved it this time was not the mountains. It was a choice. Basque families built their own hidden schools, the Ikastolak, and taught their children in secret. Scholars gathered the scattered dialects and forged them into a single written language. And when the dictatorship finally fell, Euskara walked back out into the open, into classrooms, onto road signs, into song. The oldest language in Western Europe had been buried alive, and it dug itself out. So, in the end, how much of the mystery have we solved? The half written in blood we have. The Basques did not survive by standing still. Their blood was replaced. 40% of their ancestry rewritten. Nearly all of their male lineages carried away by the same wave that remade the continent. In their genes, they are children of the Bronze Age, like the rest of us. That much, the DNA has told us for certain. What makes them singular is not one accident, but a chain of them. A geography that let them skip the later chapters that reshaped their neighbors, leaving them a living portrait of Iron Age Iberia. And a language older than any Indo-European word ever spoken in the West, that refused to die when almost every one of its cousins did. But the other half of the mystery, the reason those words survived when every rival tongue fell silent, is a question the DNA cannot answer, and perhaps nothing ever will. Maybe that is the truest thing about them. 4,000 years after history rewrote their blood, the Basques are still here, still speaking the oldest words in Western Europe. A people explained by science in almost every way, but the one that matters most. And they have not finished keeping their secret.